Vice-Almirante Coelho Cândido, thank you very much for coming over. Dear speakers, dear guests, dear friends and colleagues, bom dia, good morning. Welcome to the 9th edition of the AED Days. It is for me a great pleasure to be launching this event. It's a whole week of, well, 4 days of events and small details about what we are doing at AED, but also how can we get more connected between AED cluster and you, the users, let's say, the companies, the ecosystem, and the scientific and technological part. I don't know if some of you, but well, surely some of you, when you were younger like me, you had the dream to be a pilot. I really do not know if it was because of Top Gun and Maverick, but I still remember to go through all the magazines. My brother is down there, he knows the magazines that I used to read about aircrafts. There was no internet for the younger people here at that time, about all the technical details, namely about fighter jets. At the end, I didn't turn out to be a pilot, just rather an aerospace engineer. But still, with that, I have lots of fun. You know, as an aerospace engineer, I do not fly an aircraft, but I work with very smart people, as the ones that are here. We touch a lot of novel technologies, like, for example, artificial intelligence, which for sure will make a revolution on how we perceive aeronautics, space, and defense for the next decade. For sure, it will be a similar revolution as the jet engine introduction in the 50s. Just recently, I had the opportunity to physically attend an event, a launching event of the Clean Aviation joint undertaking. With a budget of 750 million euros budget, the Clean Aviation will for sure boost innovation in terms of the aeronautical domain towards a more sustainable industry. You know, that in the middle of all the ties and suits that were going around at the hotel, there was a presentation of a young lady which came up to the stage with a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. Her name is Zara. She's 19 years old, a child of an aviator's family. And the funny thing is that she was the first, or this youngest female to fly solo around the world in a journey of 5 months. Her speech was quite inspiring on the sense that she said all the things that she saw, all the concerns she had, all the decision-making that she had to do alone, and as well also the technology challenges that she had faced along the way. She wanted to fly a zero-emission aircraft, and she could not make it because the technology there is simply not there yet. And for example, she gave several examples on the flight between California to Mexico. She saw some bad weather ahead of her. She called her father on the satellite phone. He went to the satellite imagery and he said, well, no, it's okay, please go ahead. And at the end she called him again, no, please check it, because really the weather looks strange ahead of me. And her father looked again to the satellite imagery real time and said, no, please go straight, nothing's going by. And as you can imagine, at the end she had to diverge due to weather, and which are becoming often more violent in terms of climate changes. And that's an important thing that I also got inspired with Zara's speeches. Was not only her values that she was sharing, but while she was sharing her values, the importance of climate change. Some of the places that she saw are suffering with big impact in terms of the weather, in terms of the way things are going around in terms of the climate, and how it can really be affected for the future generations. How can they will see the things as they are today. In the next couple of minutes, I will go through some topics to really underline to you how climate and technology challenges are important for our cluster. And these 3 topics, the first of one is sustainability. As you may remember, the green transition was a key pillar of the Portuguese presidency held last year. You know, as I was mentioning, climate change is something that we have to face, we cannot ignore. And sustainability goals are something that we have to face ourselves and our industry. I don't know if you are aware, more than 60% of the tourists traveling before the COVID era, they were doing by an aircraft. In a country where tourism is such an important part of the economy, it's very interesting to see that today our industry, in terms of the footprint of the aeronautics footprint for industry, is already quite significant. I couldn't name a wide range of companies, probably just name a few. Caetano Aeronautics in Porto, Optimal just around the corner in Cascais, Wawak in Setúbal, Mecachrome, Embraer and Ernova in Évora, Rexia in Ponsor, where we held every year their summit. So a wide range of companies, not to mention ones that are still opening, and one of them opening still this summer. And understanding how aircraft fleet replacement is important because it can bring immediate benefits in terms of fuel reduction. I would say that these industries have a huge opportunity ahead of them. Also, it's important to see that when we go around, to see how much the cluster is investing in R&D. So really to position us, I would say, almost as a new game changer in terms of how we can supply novel structures and more lighter structures in the future, more efficient systems, more efficient MRO even, and even we can even talk about sustainable aviation fuel in the near future. And let me tell you that when we talk about aeronautics or aerospace industries, we always talk about innovation. Actually, it's a kind of synonym of aerospace is innovation, something which has been on the DNA of this ecosystem and of these industries, which have been always quite innovator. Portugal, in terms of the cluster, in terms of the response that we gave to the Portuguese Recovery and Resilience Program, we have made an investment, or we're planning to make an investment of around 400 million euros. Yes, 400 million euros for a cluster of these dimensions is quite a lot, and actually can create up to 1,000 highly skilled jobs, which is quite unique and important for the growth of this ecosystem on the next, I would say, 4 to 5 years. More than that, the projects that we are leading are quite challenging in terms of the expectations. Their next project, as an example, we want to develop, industrialize, and operate from Portugal 3 systems. One regional aircraft of 19 seats, and also with cargo capacity. One Cat 3 drone of around 1 ton. Well, we call it unmanned air system because it's more a system than an aircraft itself. And even to start operating advanced air mobility services, which radically can change the way we do mobility inside our cities. Speaking on innovation, innovation is also speaking on space. You know, I don't see here, but my colleague Teresa Freire, which shares the board of GMV with me, every month when we have a board meeting, she comes up with innovations going on in space. It's quite remarkable how space is moving. And it's quite remarkable because it's also, I would say, a very young industry for Portugal. Portugal joined the European Space Agency just 20 years ago. The first 20 years were focused on the development of ad hoc capabilities. Many times companies were not even talking together about what they were doing. With the creation around 4 years ago of the Portuguese Space Agency, PT Space, it was important to draft and to align, let's say, a space strategy. And like Rui likes to tell me, we are now entering a 3rd stage of this maturity of the space industries in Portugal, which is trying to go one step further, moving from just the ad hoc capability development to a system integration capability. And the ambition is quite high. You have heard about the space source programs, the Air Center, which I've mentioned to you last year. And this year, we also have a new challenge, which is much more ambitious, which is the new space proposal, which is really focusing on, I would say, an outer space commitment. The development in Portugal and integration in Portugal of high-resolution satellites, or high-resolution, or more high-resolution satellites constellation, which can support the industry on surveillance and monitoring of the Atlantic Ocean. And I would like to say that much more than the satellites in space, the downstreams application which can turn out space data, which makes sense, can turn out with space data to make sense to our daily lives, I think that's even more important. I don't know if you are aware, from the 50 KPIs that are measured by scientists to measure the impact of climate changes, 26 can only be measured by space means. So Earth observation, space navigation, satellite communications are important, really important, not only for Zara when she's flying around, but also for our climate change monitoring and how we can update, monitor, and make changes for the future. And the new space project is really aligned with that strategy. Let me just highlight you, and I think Ricardo Conte will probably mention that in his intervention. The downstream part in Portugal is also quite remarkable concerning the digital planet. How we can perceive this data and how we can make all this data available to the general public and also to the different stakeholders. Surely these all projects have, together with the ones that I've mentioned to you last year, have a tremendous value. But I would say that if we join them together, I'm sure it will multiply the benefit and its value. It's not going to be easy to materialize, but I would say that easy is for other people. And speaking on people, we have to speak on talent. It's a challenge. I was just talking with José Almirante, how can we retain the talent of younger generations? It's a big challenge. Typically, the younger generations are not so moved by a working space or a good salary. Many times they're moved, well, quite a lot, they're moved by challenges like these projects, which can bring and empower them to work in a vision, in a strategy, on a long-term strategy. And I think this can be kind of a mobilizator activity which can mobilize them to actually join this ecosystem. And, you know, gender equality and talent retention is really one of the core elements of our cluster today, because without attracting, using kind of, speaking on space, a gravitational force to attract men and women to work in this activity, in this ecosystem, we are not going to be able to grow in the next decade. And this is critical for the industry, is critical for the armed forces, and is critical for the scientific community. Sure, you will know that it's now 3 months passed by from the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Today is really 3 months. So I would say that 3 months and a day ago, we could never imagine that we would be watching every day on the news, as soon as we turn on the news about the war. We have actually today the presentation of a perception study done in 5 countries of Europe about how European citizens feel about the defense and the aeronautics industry. This study was done 2 weeks after the beginning of the war, and I pay attention to it. It's a study that is still ongoing, but can be quite important for you. Let me mention also that the raise of the defense funds mobilized by the recent approval of the strategic compass is also a quite important milestone for this ecosystem. Defense is not anymore weapons, it's not just anymore just nice aircrafts. Defense is today smart structures. Defense is today space. We use space for space communications, we use space for space tracking, and we're using space for Earth observation. And that's a major game changer actually in this war today. We use defense also in the cyber warfare, and there's another conference just around the corner about cyber warfare and the importance of cyber warfare for not only for defense, for general public, but in particular for defense. And also with now having the first steps on quantum, and we have even projects already in Portugal under the European Defense Fund for quantum. I also think, and I was just speaking with Vice Almirante about how important is not only to use the financing on development of capacities for defense, but also should we think on them for a dual-use perspective. For example, and in Portugal, it's quite important to use them for the surveillance and monitoring of the ecosystem, of the maritime ecosystem under the blue economy. This is quite relevant. We can use space assets for surveillance, and you can use defense technologies, for example, for underwater submarines, for surveillance and for many other things. And I think in terms of budget of defense, it's also an opportunity to develop new capabilities, novel products. So I would say it's also important to use this knowledge to promote the more closer the involvement of our supply chain, our national supply chain closer to a wider supply chain, which is the defense supply chain, which is moved at the global level. It's a difficult, complex supply chain to get in, but as soon as you are in, it's easier to maintain. But this threshold, this jump is quite complex. So it's one of the commitments of the cluster is to work on that. Also working with armed forces to have the ecosystem closer to the execution of the Portuguese programming law. And as important, to work closer with the armed forces on development of joint capabilities done by our scientific sector and also done by our industries. Actually, this is happening now. We are having a series of meetings with the different branches of the armed forces to present to them the capabilities available and the interest from the industry and the scientific ecosystem to work with the armed forces, and the reception has been very, very good. I would say outstanding in terms of this joint win-win, let's say, perspective. And what you see here is a picture of the Pesco Musas project, which is targeting underwater, modern underwater submarines and also integration with manned and unmanned platforms. And it's a very good example of this articulation between the armed forces and the cluster. As well, let me underline here the articulation that we've been doing with the IDD and the MOD. I was just talking with some people from the MOD before coming in. Is crucial, and I believe the success that Portugal is having today in terms of the involvement in the European Defence Fund has been quite fruitful because of this coordination. And joint coordination is really important so that we can actually boost our economy of defense. Just to conclude, you may not be aware, but this cluster, this ecosystem has been growing in a double digit for the last decade, or more than the last decade, since 2010. The level of involvement that we've seen from international and national investors in aeronautics, space, and also in defense is quite unique, which really reinforces that our sweet spot, which involves salaries, but also knowledge, competences, governmental will, and so on, values. This national sweet spot is working well, is attractive, and is bringing value to the industry, but also to the community. And however, we have to be careful that in a moment when we see the news that even the metaverse is making this one-way flight to the aerospace and defense industries, I think we should keep attention because it can be, let's say, a moment of inflection between our industries are ready for what is existing today, and our industries should be ready for what's coming up. What is the next step? So we really should rethink on how we do design, model-based, on how we produce with less resources new systems and new structures, and even how we put them into the market in a more efficient way. What actions can we take? Well, I would say that would not be a one day, would be a workshop of a week or more. I would just mention two elements. As you see in the picture, I consider that the Portuguese Recovery and Resilience Program is I would say, an impact-driven approach. It can really leverage, can be a quantum step from where we are today as a software provider to a system provider, from a system provider to a system integrator, and from a system integrator even to an OEM. This is happening both in the space and in the aeronautical project activities. So it's quite important that all the pieces get together. The industry, the scientific sector, the government, the end users, PT Space, Ricardo, you are down there. All together, it's important to have this to maximize the impact in our economy. I think it's crucial. Also, I would say that it's important to establish a plan that investors, both national and international, when they come to Portugal, they know that they should involve more the Portuguese industry in the ecosystem. They should work closer with the cluster and the ecosystem. And they should also think on a long-term perspective of investment and not just on the supply. And actually, this is happening now. Already, some of these international suppliers are already cooperating quite closely with the ecosystem to really grow as a whole. And this is even more important in defense, because defense sometimes has huge investments in terms of acquisitions. And I have to say that the cluster today is quite ready for this challenge, is quite ready for the new technological needs that are needed, and it's quite ready to shake hands. And how we are going to measure the success? Well, success could be measured also in a week time, I would say, but let me just mention one word: strength. We should strengthen our customers. What I mean with strengthening our customers can be European Space Agency, can be the Armed Forces, it can be the airlines. With better products, with novel capabilities, we are succeeding. We should also strengthen our alliances with synergies and with commitment. It was just, I think, 3 years ago that Donald Trump was questioning the existence of NATO, and 3 years ago, Mr. Emmanuel Macron was saying, well, NATO is brain dead, and look where we are today. Things changed a lot. And actually, I think this can be a good opportunity for the ecosystem to really find the pieces which are missing, the pieces that we don't want to be so dependent on externalities, pieces where the Europe and NATO want to be more less dependent of foreign supplies. So that can be an opportunity that the cluster can take. And sure, strengthening our values. That's what we stand for. And I see Erdal there. I'm sure when France and Germany signed the Nord Stream 2, they may have, Russia and Germany signed the Nord Stream 2. Maybe Russia and Germany had the same interests, but I doubt they had the same values. And we see today that they do not have the same values. Just to finalize, I think you still remember Zara that I've mentioned to you in the beginning. So I really believe that we share many of Zara values, many of Zara concerns, many of Zara ambitions. And in our physical world, where the physics, at least until now, the physics still apply, it's very important that we not only enjoy the fantastic world that we have, but we also have the responsibility to keep it together so future generations can enjoy it also. So I would see that decarbonization is a really important step for the cluster and a really good opportunity for the cluster to increase its capabilities, to get modernized, and to increase its competitiveness. And it's happening. This Brighter Fruits is already happening now. Let me just make you, I would say, a final invitation. Please get on board on our flight tour, on our journey for a neutral carbon world. Please join our adventure. I'm thirsty now. I wish you a great event. Thank you very much. So, just a special thank you to our platinum sponsors, Embraer and Airbus. And now I would like to call to the stage Francisco from our CTO. Please join us.